This Minnesota State Capitol is the third state capitol building built in St. Paul. The first one was built in downtown St. Paul. That was in the 1850s, even when we were still a territory. And over the years, they expanded that space, and by 1881, it was kind of a brick and wood building that probably no longer was serving the purpose of Minnesota very well. And in 1881, a fire burned it to the ground. And so there was a second capitol built on that same location. And it was, once again, a functional space, but not really meeting the needs of the expanding state government of Minnesota. And the ventilation wasn't very good, so even a few years after that had been built and occupied, there was discussion among the legislature to say, we need to find a building that's permanent and that's going to accommodate the needs of the public as well as our growing state government. So there was a commission put together, a board of Capitol commissioners in the 1890s, and they chose an architect, Cass Gilbert, to build this third and present-day state capitol. The building construction took place, they had the groundbreaking in 1896, and it opened to the public in 1905. The first week of January of 1905, it was opened for that legislative session. And if you were to walk into the building at that time, this was really a state-of-the-art building. It had its own electrical power plant built next door, so it was wired with electricity. And you had working elevators, you had all the convenience of indoor plumbing as well. And so this was really a spectacular public building for the people of Minnesota. Yeah, Cass Gilbert was born in Zanesville, Ohio, but as a youngster moved out here with his family in St. Paul. And he basically kind of claimed St. Paul as his home. And in 1895 was selected as the architect for this state capitol building. There's a lot of kind of interesting stories behind him being selected. He was a qualified architect for one thing. His plans were kind of what they were looking for, so every architect in the competition had to submit a drawing of what they wanted the building to be. And some of the requirements the Board of Capitol Commissioners wanted was to have a building with a big dome, similar to what you'd see in Washington, D.C. Kind of the emblematic center of a state capitol would be that dome. And then also just some of the features he was able to add to that was appealing to them. There's also some, questions too. People question his connection to the vice president of that Capitol Board of Commissioners, who was Channing Seabury. He lived next door to his mother, Cass Gilbert's mother, so they were friends, and so there was a good relationship between Cass Gilbert and the vice president of the commission. So there's some people who are questioning, did he get it because he was already well known by one of the commissioners? But I think just by his own merit, he qualified as probably the best architect for this project. And as you walk around or walk into the state capitol, it really is a magnificent piece of architecture and decoration, and everything fits together so well. And it's kind of like his first masterpiece, one of his great buildings of his career is the Minnesota Capitol. When you walk up to the front of the building or drive by the building, you'll see the white marble. And this is a Georgia marble. Minnesota doesn't have any marble, and that was an early controversy about what stone he would use for the Capitol construction, but he wanted to emulate that Italian Renaissance. Italy, it's white marble buildings. He had a couple of options. One was a Vermont marble. Not sure why that wasn't selected, but he was looking at a new marble that was being quarried in Georgia. So some people say, well, there was some animosity still after the Civil War. We're 40 years removed from the Civil War, so why are you buying marble from Georgia? But I don't know if that's necessarily the case. What he was looking at is trying to recreate that Italian Renaissance building. And the other option he could have pursued was to have a granite from St. Cloud, very prolific stone. That was an up-and-coming industry in the state. And so there was a lot of kind of desire for him to use that as the stone, because you're going to hire the people from the quarries to quarry the stone. You're going to hire the people from Minnesota to shape the stone as you put it on as a cladding of your building. And he fought pretty hard to kind of keep that white Georgia marble as part of the equation for the exterior, and he won out eventually. The Board of Capitol Commissioners had a vote, and they, after several votes, were persuaded to use the white Georgia marble. So there was a compromise. They have the ground floor and the steps are all made of St. Cloud granite. So there's still a lot of Minnesota stone. The interior stone on the walls is all a Kasota limestone from southern Minnesota. And there's pipe stone and other types of stone that's part of Minnesota's identity that are incorporated in the decoration. And the other part of using that white Georgia marble too is the Butler Ryan Company were the general contractors to build this building, and they went down to Georgia and leased the quarry that the stone was located at. So they cut out the middleman so they could cut the stone, shape it down there, and then move it up into workshops that were built behind the Capitol construction area, where craftsmen, stone cutters, stone carvers could actually shape the stone as needed. So you were still hiring those labor workers and those special skilled, craftsmen to build this building. And so that was, I think, a good remedy to a solution where there might have been some controversy about what stone he would use as the cladding for the exterior. But one thing you'll see too is the dome, and that's based on St. Peter's in the Vatican. And so that was, if you look at that dome and this dome, you'll see the same columns, you'll see some of the same architectural detail that's captured into this space here. You'll see large columns inside the building of big, granite columns or these Italian marble columns. You'll see symmetry too, which is an important part of keeping that architectural, kind of that tradition together in these spaces. And so along with that, you'll see stenciling, beautiful arabesque stenciling in the ceilings, and large paintings incorporated as part of the architecture as well. The German Rathskeller is in the basement of the Capitol, and once again it was something that Cass Gilbert wanted to have some of that European influence, as you'll see with the different types of stone that were from throughout Europe and Africa and all over the world to be brought here for decoration. But he wanted that Rathskeller to be a space where it would be emblematic of what a German public hall would be. So they would have their political discussions upstairs, and then in the basement they would have a restaurant, which was called a Rathskeller. And so that would be a place that they could come after the work was done and just have fellowship and friendship and talk and discuss things in a more informal situation. There's also German sayings that are mostly drinking slogans. And so that was fine until World War I took place. And then, of course, we were fighting Germany, so there was a lot of anti-German sentiment in the state. And also there was also people trying to prohibit the sale of alcohol. And so because you have the German influence and also the drinking slogans, the entire stenciled ceilings were painted over, so it was all whitewashed. And then over time, there were some efforts to bring back some of the original stencil, and that might be up for a few years, and then that got covered over as well. And so that was restored in 1999 and opened to the public again in 2000. And as part of that process, the art conservators did the initial investigation and discovered there are 22 layers of white paint over the original ceiling. And so that was a big part of revealing that once lost important space in the state capitol. We had a governor back in the 1980s, Governor Rudy Perpich, who really was seeing the importance of investment of this building to make it start looking back to what it would have been originally. And that kind of started just a slow process of restoring the House and the Senate chambers. And then also we did the Rathskeller, and parts of the Supreme Court chamber were brought back with original colors and the carpet and the walls. And this next phase of work is a complete and entire restoration repair project. So it's kind of like these other projects were kind of leading up to the bigger project. But it's one of those things that just kind of evolved over time from small projects to the bigger project today. When this building opened to the public, I think people were amazed. That's one word that you often read about. They were lost their breath walking into the rotunda because it's a 142-foot inner ceiling where you look up and you see this big 6-foot wide chandelier. And so I think there was a lot of the oohs and the ahs, and people were amazed by just the beauty of the architecture. They've been seeing the outside being built for 9 years, and then when you actually walk in, the color schemes were perfect. It's a nice warm building. It's a space where people could feel welcome because now you have easy access to the different chambers, and you're part of this building, you're part of the government, and that was the intent. And so I think critics all over the United States marveled at it as well. One thing St. Paul people were living with was this idea that we were still on the frontier. We're at the turn of the century, the 19th century, and people were still thinking we lived in log cabins and really didn't have much of modern conveniences. And so for the people out east who were making those judgments, to see favorable reports and artists commenting and architects commenting about the greatness of this building, it really kind of made St. Paul come up a notch culturally. It was really a center of culture for the city of St. Paul and the state of Minnesota. So I think people were really proud to say, hey, we've arrived. you can't call us a backwoods frontier state anymore. You know, our building rivals anything you can build in New York or Philadelphia or Chicago. And so that was kind of a nice statement for people of the state to say, hey, we have a marvelous building that will stand, you know, the test of time.